On this podcast, I've talked about all kinds of food rationing topics that affected American citizens during World War II. But food rationing didn't just affect people. It directly affected animals too. Today, we're taking a closer look at how Americans kept their dogs and cats fed in wartime despite rationing. In the second half of the episode, we'll be discussing Fido enlisting in the war in an interview with Kelsey Lonie, military historian, dog owner, and passionate researcher of the Dogs for Defense program. Let's get started. Welcome to The Victory Kitchen, the podcast all about American food rationing during World War II. I'm your host, Sarah Creviston Lee, author, historian, and vintage foodie. I'll be exploring the logistics of food rationing, featuring wartime cookbooks and recipes, and highlighting real Homefront experiences. We're going to be learning exactly what our grandmothers had to do to get their food to fight for victory. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Victory Kitchen podcast. I am so glad to be back. I've been busy with school, and while the new semester has started, I was able to do a bunch of research over the Christmas break for this episode. In 2023, we entered the world of being pet owners when we adopted our orange and white polydactyl kitten, Caspian. He is now a large 15-pound cat who likes to play fetch with Nerf gun bullets and religiously watches our chickens and the wild birds outside. And he will be turning 2 years old this month. Having a number of friends who are also very devoted pet parents, the love for their animals inspired me to look deeper into how wartime affected pet owners' ability to feed their pets. First, though, we're going to take a short look into the history of commercial pet food in America to get a good picture of the types of products available for pets as we head into World War II. So first, there was a Cincinnati native, James Spratt. He developed a dog biscuit called Spratt's Patent Meal Fibrine Dog Cakes and started marketing it in 1860 in England. It was a huge hit, and in 1870, he brought the product to the United States and kickstarted the pet food industry. And I want to throw this in there. Veterinary medicine was founded in the United States in 1895, starting specialized care of pets. The rise of veterinary medicine wasn't necessarily directly connected to the pet food industry, but it's interesting to see how the start of this profession coincided with the emergence of pet food and the ideas of pet care in our country. Then, after World War I in 1918, there was a big surplus of horses. So a man named P.M. Chappell turned inexpensive horses into meat for dogs, creating the first tinned dog food under the brand Ken L. Ration. In 1941, metal was needed as they geared up for the possibility of war. Tin was a vital material, so the government was no longer allowing companies to can dog and cat food. Pet food producers had to find another way to get their products on the market, and so dehydrated pet food, which could be sold in bags, came onto the market. These were heavily advertised, appealing to customers of the product's convenience and its so-called balanced nutrition. Their aggressive marketing paid off, and to this day, dry food dominates the pet food market at 60% of sales. However, wet food, and I would add fresh and frozen food that I've noticed become more popular, they have been growing in recent years, and wet food holds 36% of the market. And we'll talk more about commercial pet food in wartime a bit later. So here we are at the eve of the U.S. entering the war. Now let's take a look at how pets were fed in pre-war America. And this is important. To better comprehend the challenges that pet owners faced during the war, we need to first understand how they were feeding their pets before the war. And it wasn't just dry and canned food. This is a really fascinating time to study because wartime is the intersection of feeding pets human foods and the reliance on commercially prepared foods. Feeding pets with regular food made from scratch is practically a lost skill today because our society depends so much on commercial food. So learning from this section of history is really important. First, we're going to start with cats. And the reason why I'm only focusing on cats and dogs is because they were, I'd say, the most affected by wartime rationing. obviously people had other pets like rabbits and goats and horses and all kinds of things. So I just wanted to put that out there so people didn't feel like, oh, you're leaving out these animals over here. And I even came across some articles talking about how birds were suffering a bit from wartime. So like wild birds, but we're not going to go into that for this episode, sadly. So just cats and dogs. First up is cats, like I said. And the first book that I consulted was this book called, it's more like a booklet. It's called All About Cats by Marguerite Saxby Mabie. She was the president of the Boston Cat Club, and this book was published in 1941. And technically, this is a product pamphlet because she's also endorsing the Jack and Jill brand of cat food that was made from fish. So she says that to feed cats, they are meat eaters. So natural diet for cats is fish and flesh is what she says. Lamb, chicken, boiled beef or lamb kidneys. She says cats also need some lean, raw beef at least 3 times a week, about 1/3 pound per feeding. Small beef or lamb bones to chew on were recommended, but never chicken or turkey bones because they splinter. Finally, lean, fresh fish like haddock and cod or Jack and Jill cat food. Then she talks about vegetables that are good to feed cats: spinach, string beans, carrots, lettuce, and tomatoes. Any of these can be mixed with their fish or meat or given plain with a little butter. She says a little milk is okay, but avoid starchy, sweet, greasy, or rich table scraps. How often? Adult cats should have 2 meals a day, breakfast and supper, because cats' stomachs are small. And I'm going to provide a suggested weekly menu that she provides for kittens. I'll put that in my Substack post. She also mentions that a good kitten's diet includes a soft boiled egg, oatmeal, some milk, and scraped raw lean beef fed at specific intervals for 4 meals a day. Cod liver oil was also highly recommended, a weekly dose of catnip, and growing a pot of grain grass for them to nibble on. So I just want to take a pause here and say that all of the recommendations from wartime or pre-war that I'm reading to you, these are from the specific time period, and the things that are good or not good for cats are slightly different now to our understanding. So keep that in mind, that there might be some strange things that they're recommending to feed your pets, but just take it with a grain of salt. And as always, if you have questions about changing diets for your pets, please consult your veterinarian. The next book I consulted was called Cats and All About Them by L.H. Fairchild, M.D. and Helen G. Fairchild. This was published in 1945. And while this was published during wartime, their recommendations are just kind of general guidelines for feeding a cat. They say, the first thing to remember in feeding the cat correctly is that it is a carnivorous or meat-eating animal. While it is capable of adjusting itself to various foods, it needs lean, raw meat as the basis of the diet. So they say to feed lean, raw meat at least once each day, ground meat for kittens, larger pieces for older cats for the health of their gums. Some people prefer horse meat. The food should be heated to body temperature because cats are sensitive. I found that interesting. But that's true. I've tried to give my cat cold food because it was stored in the fridge and he didn't like it as much. They say the other daily meal should consist of fish, dry, farmer-style cottage cheese, liver, heart, or kidney. If fresh fish is fed, it should be carefully boned or steamed so the bones are not sharp and brittle. If your cat catches a mouse, it shouldn't be taken away because the mouse provides important nutrients for your cat. I would probably add here birds as well. There are quite a few articles complaining about cats eating the poor little birds. And yeah, there was some debate about that. They also say to give your cats diet variety. You can feed them roast beef, chicken, turkey, shrimp as a treat, dry kitty kibble, roast lamb, etc. They also suggest a beaten raw egg, which may be fed often, is fine to bring out the gloss of the coat. Some cat breeders feed their cats steamed chicken heads or fresh tripe. Some cats can tolerate milk, but many don't, so milk can be avoided entirely. Vegetables like beans, carrots, or corn are harmful to cats. They say cereals are not a natural food for cats either and should be avoided in coarse form. One pet can easily be fed on table scraps if one steers away from fats, starches, and fibrous vegetables. And then fresh water is a must. So it's very interesting to see the comparison between these two sources. They agree on quite a few things, but some things they do not agree. So the consensus is that cats are carnivores and they need meat. They recommend feeding eggs in some form. Dry cat food should be a supplemental part of their diet, not the entire diet. And then there's differing opinions on what types of vegetables to feed cats and whether grains were good or not. So that's interesting. Now we're going to move on to dogs. I consulted a book called Dog Etiquette by Ralston Purina Company from 1941. Obviously, this is a product-focused book. They're promoting Purina dog chow. So they say that is central to a dog's diet because of how it's a, quote, complete balanced food actually tested and proved by dogs at the Purina Experimental Kennel. They say that scientifically balanced dog chow is a complete meal for your dog, or it can be mixed with meat, milk, or table leftovers. It improves these other foods because it's so high in proteins, minerals, vitamins, and the things your dog needs for lots of vigor and a glossy coat. So obviously highly biased here. They say that feeding the dog chow dry was ideal because it gives the dog's teeth and gums a workout. So that's similar to cats. If your dog prefers a soft, moist diet, especially older dogs, they suggest mixing the dog chow meal with warm water, soup, or milk. You can also add meat, vegetables, or table leftovers for variety. The foods to avoid included chicken or pork bones, which splinter easily and could pierce the throat or stomach. Avoid fat or greasy foods. Heavy, starchy foods like potatoes, cake, and candy should be fed sparingly, if at all. Food rations for sporting dogs like racers or sled dogs, as well as conditioning requirements for hunting dogs, made feeding even more varied and complicated. So yeah, that's a whole other topic. So that is from the Ralston book. The next book I consulted for dogs was Your Dog's Life by Polk Miller Products Corp., also Sargent's dog book. And Sargent's was a brand of dog vitamins and remedies. So I feel like while this is a product book, it's less biased because it's not touting a specific brand of dog food. They say a dog can eat beef and lamb, a little pork and plenty of fish, liver, heart, and other glandular organs, milk, eggs, and cheese, especially cottage cheese. That's similar to the cats. Carrots, spinach, lettuce, onions, and tomatoes, shredded wheat, whole wheat bread, toasties, and things like that. And today you can buy some good prepared foods put up expressly for dogs, cereals in either the meal, the kibble, or the hard-baked biscuit form, and complete foods with meat. The grown dog's 2-meal-a-day menu consists of, this is what they suggest. In the morning, a bowl of whole, fresh milk or buttermilk, and a few biscuits fed dry. In the evening, meat, grated carrot or other vegetable, and crumbled bread, all moistened slightly with the broth in which the meat has been cooked, or lacking broth with tomato juice. Or another option for a menu is in the morning, a boiled egg and toast. I don't know why that's funny. That just sounds like something I would eat for breakfast. In the evening, raw chopped meat mixed with moistened shredded wheat or kibbled biscuit. And then another option in the morning, shredded wheat and milk or kibble and milk. In the evening, boiled fish from which the bones have been carefully removed, mixed with well-boiled rice and shredded greens. Salt to taste. To taste. I'm not quite sure how you would achieve that, except by tasting it yourself. I don't know what the dog's taste is like, but anyway. Not too expensive menus are legion. The more varied, the more they will be enjoyed. The sole caution is that they include all, not just one or two of the foods suggested. So they are saying the dogs need to have a balanced diet. So there we are. That is kind of the philosophy and the ideas behind what to feed your dogs and cats pre-war. So how did food choices change for pet owners with the start of World War II? Before we answer this question, I just had to do this little side note. Did you know there was a special week declared for June 14th through the 20th in 1942? I got this from the Atlantic Constitution from Georgia in June of 42. And the title of this article is Canines and Friends Protest Describing Hitler as a Dog. It says more than 20,000 dogs will take part next week in Don't Call Nazis Dogs Because Dogs Are Nice Week. H.N. Blair, official of the Tailwagger Club, said the week was set aside because the club was sick and tired of the abuse being heaped upon nice dogs whenever a Nazi was labeled a dog by a patriotic American. He said that Fala, President Roosevelt's Scotty, was included on the club's membership list. And this makes sense because FDR had a home in Georgia at Warm Springs. Said Kate Smith, radio singer and honorary chairman of the Tailwaggers, the time has come to show American dogs, many of which are on war duty, the proper respect and not compare them with Hitler and his kind. So, if you also want to celebrate this occasion, you can mark June 14th through the 20th on your calendar. So, back to the question, how did food choices change for pet owners with the start of World War II? As we know, the U.S. entered World War II in December of 1941. Tin was being rationed, which made it more difficult to obtain wet food that pets were accustomed to. And with all these changes, it was interesting to read through the articles and see how pet owners were scrambling to get the foods that their pets were used to and that the pets liked. Some pets are very picky. And I can imagine the stress this caused pet owners if their, picky cat or picky dog couldn't get the foods they were accustomed to. In early 1943, meat was rationed for humans, which directly impacted pets' diets. These two things were what impacted the feeding of pets the most deeply. Tinned foods, not made available anymore, and then the meat rationing. At the beginning of these changes, there was a lot of worry and speculation from pet owners because there was no allowance for pet meat ration points. Some felt that the government was essentially saying, we don't care about your animals. And some went so far as to being paranoid that they would be asked to euthanize their dogs and cats like what had happened in England early in the war. And that was a very unfortunate thing that happened. In the Atlanta Constitution from Georgia in January 1942, there's an article by Ruth Stanton Coggill. And she said, with war stalking the world and attempting to sink its fangs into the United States of America, the question of America's dogs and their welfare has become a mighty uproar. Will people become panicky and destroy dogs as they did in those first hysterical moments in England? Will there be enough food for dogs? Will dog shows be canceled? Will breeding be curtailed? A million such questions are being asked daily, while several times as many people hug Fido a little closer and slip him an extra tidbit that perhaps later will be forbidden. I really liked this little article. I think it showed very well that there was this fear about what would become of their beloved pets, especially because of what had happened in England. They just weren't sure about what was going on, and the government wasn't necessarily helpful in that matter. And this brings us to the question, what was the first clear solution that American pet owners came up with? And the government wasn't doing it for them. And what that solution was that they sacrificed their own meat ration points for those beloved pets. Many pet owners, including children, gave up meat ration stamps to buy meat for their cats and dogs. In a Nevada newspaper from 1944, there was an article called Girl Offers a Good Home and Ration Points for Dog. It says, Laura Ellen Heath, 12, loves dogs. Not only is she willing to give one of the puppies recently born to Whitneyville Bell Fire Department mascot a good home, she wrote, she will provide him also with some of my ration coupons. So she was willing to sacrifice her own meat ration coupons to give to this dog. In another article, it was called Woman Gives Up Meat Ration Points for Dog, Buys Food for Collie Awaiting the Return of Sailor Master. This is from a Pennsylvania newspaper from 1943. And it says, the story of the nameless collie who is awaiting the return of his sailor master at a bus terminal here has touched a Pittsburgh woman's heart, and she gave up her meat ration points for 2 weeks to assure him food. Mrs. R.E. Lynch of Pittsburgh sent M.R. Kendig, bus company executive, the points and 5 $1 bills after reading how the dog ran up to every sailor to see if he were his owner. Aww. She says, I work every day for a living, Mrs. Lynch wrote, and I'm alone with only a Persian cat for comfort as my husband is in the Navy. I know how my Butch, the cat, misses my husband, and cats are not as faithful as dogs. I pray all the boys will come home soon so that no more hearts, even a dog's heart, need be broken by separation. The bus line, meanwhile, announced it will build a kennel for the dog and keep him until his owner claims him. Oh, that's heartbreaking. And it's very kind of this woman to have offered her points for that dog. However, not everyone was in favor of this practice. One disgruntled reader wrote into the Minneapolis Star stating, Virginia Safford, in her column recently, told of a former university professor who used most of her red ration stamps to feed her several cats. This was told with whimsy, as if it were rather charming. This sort of thing defeats the whole rationing program. Such ignorance might be excusable in an uneducated person, but surely one should expect something better from a university professor. We in our family do not begin to use all of our red stamps because we don't eat much meat, but these stamps remain unused, thus releasing that much meat for the use of others. To use stamps to buy meat for cats and dogs simply means that some human being must go without, and that is a selfishness that is not whimsical, not charming, not funny. Oh dear. I can see her point. I can see that, the whole rationing system really was for providing humans with food, and humans buying the meat and giving it to their pets doesn't seem like a great idea because there is a meat shortage. But I would also say that these ration points were given to everyone so that there would be enough for everyone. And what they decide to do with those points in their family is up to them, So I don't know. So these families that were donating their ration stamps for their pets' food, were these families able to finally get dedicated ration points for their pets? That is a great question. The answer is no. The government's stance on meat ration stamps specifically for pets was pretty clear. A ration board in Minnesota had several requests to list their dog as a member of the family, but were told a big fat no. Ration stamps were meant for human consumption. Well, the meat purchased with the stamps are meant for human consumption. However, there's another however. Starting in 1943, there were exceptions for seeing eye dogs. I first ran across a little blurb about a blind man who was seeking ration points for his guide dog. He was very concerned with not being able to feed him and did his best to share his meat points, but meat was still pretty scarce. Sadly, I can't remember which of my magazines this reference came from, so I did a newspaper search and found some articles affirming this story. Not this particular story, but just the idea about the seeing eye dogs. The Springfield Daily Republican from Massachusetts in 1943 had this article, Seeing Eye Dogs Get Ration Points. Yesterday, meat ration books were issued by the Springfield War, Price, and Ration Board to 2 seeing eye dogs, who are now assured of a balanced diet. Ration points totaling 12 a week were issued to one of the dog owners, and the other was first issued last May. These special books are valid for a 3-month period and are subject to renewal. Another article in the same paper provided even more details. It says, issuance of 12 extra meat fat points weekly to bona fide users of seeing eye dogs or similarly trained guide dogs to make possible the purchase of a variety of low point value meats where horse meat cannot be obtained was authorized yesterday by the Office of Price Administration. Rationed meat suitable for dog feeding, OPA pointed out, may be obtained at an average ration value of about 3 points a pound and include tripe, 2 points, beef hearts, 4, lamb hearts, 3, neck bones, 4, kidneys, 2 to 5 points, and edible bones, 1 point. I really like the details about how much these things cost, points-wise, in that article. And I think it's great that they say specifically that seeing eye dogs receive 12 points a week. So it's really great to know the specifics. It would be awesome to find one of these ration books specifically for dogs. I have not located one yet. For everyone else, though, finding meat and adjusting their pets' diets was still a concern. Luckily, the vast community of cat and dog lovers soon came to the rescue by writing into newspapers with advice on feeding with the wartime restrictions. One of the pieces of advice that came pretty regularly was reminding pet owners that there were other sources of meat out there. One of them was horse meat. So, as I talked about before, beef was the ideal meat to feed both cats and dogs. But during the war, the overarching pet food recommendation was horse meat because it was an adequate substitute that would not directly affect the supply of meat meant for human consumption. And I also thought that I'm sure for hunting families, deer and other game were used for their pets' diets as well to supplement. In the Arizona Daily Star from January 1943, they say, "I think they are rendering a public service in selling this horse meat as pet food. It conserves the supply of regular meat for human consumption, as many persons who formerly bought beef for their pets now use this food." And it's important to note that the Army also used horse meat to feed their dogs of war, which we'll be talking about later. On another interesting note, horse meat was also used by dog food manufacturers, zoos, and circuses. And like I mentioned before, like horse meat had actually been used for dog food for quite some time. But the newspapers are reminding people that, yes, this is another food source. Another solution that was presented wasn't necessarily by everyday people. Sometimes it was, but it was mostly the pet food producers. This was the heyday of commercially produced pet food because suddenly people needed another source of protein for their pets. These companies had already been around, of course, but the need for shelf-stable, convenient nutrition for pets was needed with the meat and tin rationing, which affected the wet food. So commercial pet food companies came to the rescue of pet owners with newly developed dehydrated food. Since it was new, education about the different kinds of foods and how to use them made the rounds. And I found this really interesting. I myself have never been a dog owner, so I haven't had to feed a dog before and know all the different kinds. I just know cat food. But this interesting article from the Cincinnati Enquirer from September 1942 says, "New dog foods palatable. Differences are explained." I love it when they explain stuff. It says the most confusing point in the minds of dog owners today is the difference between the two main types of dog food that are now being offered, namely dehydrated dog food and dry dog food. Just what is the difference? Dehydrated dog foods are those from which the natural moisture has been removed at low temperature by the dehydration process. Moisture is then added before serving, either water, soup, or broth, and the end product is similar to the wet dog food from cans. I actually think this is pretty clever because if your dog's used to wet food, this would be a good alternative. Then there's dry dog food, which was made in several forms: biscuits, kibbled or broken biscuits, compressed, cubes or pellets, and mixed meal type. And I actually have a picture from a book, a dog care book that I'll have on my Substack, so you can see the actual differences between these. The article says the biscuit form is made from ingredients that are mixed into a dough, which is baked at a high temperature. The kibbled form is made by breaking the biscuits into small pieces or kibbles and is fed by soaking in water. The biscuit and kibbled forms are the most widely used forms of dry food. The compressed form consists of dry ingredients being mixed with some binder ingredients and forced through a tube or plate to form the cube, pellet, or ribbon shape. Then the meal form consists of mixing dry ingredients and generally is not processed further. These dry dog foods use cereals and non-inspected meat scraps as the principal source of protein. Most dry dog foods require the addition of meat, fat, or table scraps to complete the diet before feeding. They then warn readers to select a dog food company that has a good reputation for quality food and to be diligent about reading the ingredients list on the dog food bags. So I think this is an interesting distinction because the dehydrated food seems to be the most complete form of dog food nutrition-wise, and then the meal form is the least beneficial because it uses cereals and non-inspected meat scraps, and then you have to supplement it with other foods like meat, fat, or table scraps. I looked at quite a few ads. There are so many dog food and cat food ads. But I paid attention to the ones that have specific like wartime wording. Here's one for Bonnie, dog, and cat food. Having dog food trouble? Then try this new pet food. And then Purina Dog Chow, America's favorite food for hunting dogs. Save the family meat points. For dog chow, fed dogs don't need fresh meat. And then Sergeant's Dog Medicines. Here we are with them again. You call this meat? Meat rationing is hard for that uncomplaining pup who helps keep up morale. His folks have less time for him. Some are away in uniform. And now this. Make up for what he used to get in meat. Milk and eggs supply proteins. Sergeant's vitamin capsules, or Vitapets, supply all meat vitamins and all the different vitamins a dog needs. Then Worthmore Dog Food, a thrifty answer to the shortage of dog food packed in tins, meal or pellets. Then there's Save Tin for the government, save money for yourself, buy Thrivo dog and cat food in the cardboard victory package. 1 box feeds dog for a week. And this was a dry dog food. Then there's this one that says, save ration points, use dehydrated dog food. And then it lists several brands. Ideal, Pard, Grow Pup, which was Kellogg's, and IQ. And those came in pellets. And then another one, do you have pets at your house? Most of us have cats or dogs, and many people have been worried about not being able to buy canned foods for their pets. If you are one of those people, then your fears may be allayed. For these best kinds of food have been prepared and is on the market in dehydrated form, a food that contains all the diet essentials and one that your pets will like. This was more like an informative little blurb. It wasn't touting one specific brand. So lots of options out there for commercially prepared pet foods. I'd like to break down in more detail the wartime diets of cats and dogs. And this is where the advice of people, whether it was professionals or just everyday people, they would write into newspapers. And in some cases, I have some magazine articles that explain more in detail kind of how they're coping. The first resource that I found was from Cats Magazine. And on the Internet Archive, they have a handful of wartime editions of this magazine. So if you love cats and love learning about wartime, you should check these out. I'll have a link for all of these wartime editions in my resources on Substack. This article was called Feeding in Wartime, and it was by Helen Fairchild, which is interesting because she was the one that wrote the book Cats and All About Them, along with her husband. She says, whenever cat breeders get together, almost the first question that is asked is, what are you feeding your cats, and how are they getting along on wartime rations? Speaking for ourselves, the answer is fine. We have not had to cut down the number of cats fed, although I will admit there is more work involved than was in the old days when everything needed was available. We used to feed lean, raw beef to the cats once each day. Now we are feeding horse meat. I imagine this is available in most parts of the country. Some vets feel that horse meat is more acid than beef, and we have been advised to add a small amount of powdered charcoal to each feeding. I use about 1.5 teaspoons to 3.5 pounds of meat. The vitamins are also added to the meat each morning, 3 drops of concentrated cod liver oil, 1 brewer's yeast tablet per cat, and for the pregnant and nursing queens, a pinch of bone meal. before rationing, we always added tomato juice to this. But now we buy vitamin C tablets and crush 1 on each cat's portion of food. We used to feed canned sardines and mackerel, but buy fresh fish scraps and cook them in the pressure cooker and can in glass jars enough for several days' feedings. I found it is better to buy the smaller fish if possible and crush the bones after they are cooked thoroughly. This furnishes needed calcium. We are still able to get dry farmer-style cottage cheese, which we think is very good for the cats to eat at least once each week. And when we can get either kidney, heart, or liver, this is fed once or twice a week. In our experience, we have found that a steady diet of liver especially is likely to cause loose bowels. To keep the cat's teeth clean and gums healthy, we give a hard, dry dog kibble once or twice a week for them to work on. Unfortunately, all of the cats do not especially like the dry food, merely use the pellets to play ball. If cats would only gnaw on the bone like a dog, the problems of keeping their teeth clean would be greatly lessened. But a cat will merely nibble the meat daintily and not chew the bone at all. When the war first started, we bought a unit of fine rabbits with the idea of feeding the meat to the cats in case our horse meat supply broke down. But after our gardener left and the meat supply seemed assured, we sold the bunnies without ever having killed a one on our place. However, I do know of other breeders who use rabbit meat for their cats with great success. Some cat owners and breeders, particularly on small farms or ranches, also keep goats for the milk to feed their cats. We have never found cow's milk agreed with our cats, and I have heard other breeders say the same, but goat's milk seemed to be a fine food for them. I was interested in the new cat food advertised on the back cover of the January issue of Cats magazine, and this brand was called It's the Cat's Food. Not very imaginative. I have not had a chance to try it as yet, but the formula given in the advertisement looks very good. For a person with only 1 or 2 cats, it should fill a long-felt need, and the cat owner can go back to using her red points for meat for herself. Oh, why? So that is a very detailed description of what this particular cat breeder was doing to feed her cats. I like that she shows the readers, how, like, kind of the trial and error, how they kind of had to find a balance because of the restrictions that they were facing. Really informative. And now we're going to move on to dogs. For dog owners, it was just as problematic, if not more so, because in general, dogs eat way more than cats. And these weren't just the regular family dogs we're talking about. This included sporting dogs like hunters, sledders, and racing dogs. In the Morning News from Delaware in April 1943, one man lamented about how difficult it was feeding his hunting dogs. He says, in the good old days, we could go to the family butcher and buy a bag of scraps or meat that was no longer desired by the public, take it home, put it in a pot with some water, carrots, greens, tomatoes, give it a good boiling, and have enough to mix with other prepared food to last a week. But all that has changed now. No rationing points, no meat and bones. And then in the Chicago Tribune from March 1942, there was an article by Bob Becker called Mostly About Dogs, Meat Costs Add New Problem. And this man shared how he dealt with the meat shortages. He says, our dogs have been fed and kept healthy on a varied diet made up of canned dog food, good dry dog food, some beef and lamb from the table, canned fish, boned, and an occasional meal of tripe boiled with vegetables. When beef went up, we turned to tripe as a source of fresh meat for our dogs, and on nights when they did not get canned dog food, they were fed a biscuit plus tripe. And then finally, in Your Dog's Life, which was that Sergeant's Medicine book, they have a special section on dogs and meat rationing, which I thought was fantastic. They mentioned that meat rationing cuts down the dog's share of the red muscle meats. But you needn't worry. The low point meats will keep him happy and healthy. Heart, liver, kidneys, spleen, brains from beef, lamb, and pork supply the protein he needs. They say to cook them lightly or braise to tempt his appetite. Tripe, beef cheeks, oxtails, and so on can usually be procured through a slaughterhouse, if not in retail stores. Perhaps your butcher can order them for you. Poultry is fine. And fish trimmings, the rounded flesh and bone portions of large steak fish, can be purchased economically and simmered in milk or water. On the market is horse meat, also dehydrated foods, which can pinch hit for meats in a well-balanced diet. Eggs are good. Milk and cottage cheese are fine foods, rich in protein. Certain vegetables supply protein. Peas, peanut and soybean meal, and cooked cereals. Add the water in which meats or vegetables have been cooked, gravy leftovers, or milk to the pup's meal, and you've added nourishment and appetite appeal. And then what I found were a whole bunch of recipes that people contributed to the newspapers. I'm not going to go over them all now, but I will have them all for both cats and dogs on my Substack. And once again, if you are tempted to try these recipes for your own pets, please consult with your veterinarian because there are some things that they thought were okay back then, but today they would not recommend. Now, we're going to move on to the significant role of pets in World War II. In America, men who went into the armed forces worried about their dogs being cared for. And I found one adorable article describing the situation from Kansas City in 1942. A $20 money order accompanied the longest letter Mrs. William F. Brazier of rural Johnson County, Kansas, has received from son Roger, an apprentice seaman in the Navy. It says, "Dearest mother, please buy a bond and spend what's left for dog food for Coach." That's really sweet. I know many of the armed forces were leaving behind these loved cats and dogs, and I'm sure they missed them a great deal. Now, cats on the home front, they served as, besides very loved house pets, they boosted morale, they kept down rodent populations, and brought together the community with cat clubs and cat competitions. They also worked hard in the military as mousers and as mascots. I found a very helpful article, Pets at Wartime, from a pet insurance website, actually. But I thought what they had to say was really great. It says, cats in World War II had a similar role as they did in the previous World War, catching rats and mice. Though it may initially sound like a small part to play in the grand scheme of things, the significance of these felines' work should not be overlooked. If there was no way to keep the rodent population under control, whether on ships or camps on land, these rats could have chewed through essential items such as ropes and wires, ruined large amounts of food rations, and spread disease. Not to mention they can leave quite a mess behind, and there's always a possibility of them biting the soldiers. Those are all really good points. It sounds like cats were pretty essential in contributing to the health and wellness of our troops. And I also came across in the Cats magazine from March 1945, somebody was pointing out about the problems that they had in England because they had euthanized all of those cats and dogs early in the war for fear of not being able to feed them. It says, bombs kill cats, bring rats. In England, where cats were destroyed wholesale in the first years of bombing, so victims of bombing as well, not just euthanizing, rats have increased to such an extent that people have to hang food up by cords and ropes from the ceilings to keep the eatables from the rodents. Here in the U.S., it is estimated that every city dweller supports one rat and every country dweller 2. Page the alley cat, feed and protect her. So yeah, those cats were important. They could be a nuisance sometimes, especially those wild cats outside, but they still served an essential purpose. Now, dogs, on the other hand, well, not on the other hand, they're very similar roles. On the home front, dogs played a variety of roles: family pet and morale booster. They strengthened communities via dog clubs and dog competitions. They were guard dogs, hunting dogs. They were used for transportation in colder climates like sled dogs, and for sport like greyhound racing dogs. They also served in important roles in the military. And to talk about this, we are welcoming back a guest that I had in my Canadian episode, Kelsey. Kelsey Lonie holds a master's degree in military history and is the executive director and chief historian of the Royal United Services Institute of Regina, a Canadian military history institute. She is the author of 2 upcoming books, both about the Second World War, set to release in late 2025, and we'll hear more about those later. Kelsey sits on the board of directors for the Organization of Military Museums Canada and received the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Medal in 2023 in recognition of her efforts in unveiling a statue in Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, celebrating Canadian soldiers' contribution there. Last but not least, she is the loving pet parent of a beautiful cat named Micah and a sweet boy, Rocky, who is a Shetland sheepdog. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this topic.
Me too. I know we have talked a lot about dogs in wartime and we kind of fangirl about it. So I'm very excited to talk to you about this topic. So I guess just getting straight to it, can you tell us about the Dogs for Defense program?
Yeah, anytime dogs and the military come together, it's my favorite topic. So the Dogs for Defense program was established during the Second World War with the goal of utilizing trained dogs for military purposes. So the program was created by groups who worked with obedience clubs, and they saw that there was potential for dogs in combat, and advocated for the use of dogs in various roles, including training, casualty, ambulance, messenger duties. And with the support of the American Kennel Club, Dogs for Defense Incorporated was formed to provide the military with trained dogs. On March 13th, 1942, the U.S. Army accepted the idea of using military dogs and commissioned the first 200 trained dogs for Defense. And this marked the beginning of the Dogs for Defense program. It was in response to the fact that other countries, Russia, Germany, Great Britain, and Japan, already had war dogs, and the U.S. didn't. So the Dogs for Defense program filled this gap and provided the U.S. military with a valuable resource in the form of trained dogs.
That's great. There's a lot of dogs that started at the beginning. So 200, that's quite a lot. Did they come from like all over the country?
Yeah, well, the first dogs were chosen from kind of the American Kennel Club and picked certain breeds and types. And then they had a lot of success with these first dogs. And then they asked for more and more dogs. And then soon they realized that they needed a way wider stream to choose from.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad the American Kennel Club came up because I was just looking at their online digital archive, and so I wanted to put a quick plug for their archive because they have all their magazines digitized from wartime, and there's so many cool things in their magazines about war dogs. And just anything you can think of.
Yeah, they're a great source.
Yeah. So did the military only prefer certain breeds of dogs, or could any dog join up?
The dogs did have to meet specific criteria, so they had to be between the ages of 1 and 5 years old, stand at least 20 inches tall, weigh at least 50 pounds, and be unafraid of loud noises. Initially, they only accepted purebred dogs, but then because of high demand, mixed breed dogs and mutts were also allowed. Initially, they accepted more than 30 different breeds, but as they started training the dogs, the list started to be narrowed to specific breeds that succeeded and did really well with the certain training. So German Shepherds, Sheepdogs, Doberman Pinschers, and short-haired farm collies, they were kind of the top choices. Then they also had Huskies used as sled dogs, which are kind of lesser known. But as the need for the dogs increased, the program started reaching out to the public for donations. And that's when civilians started contributing their pets to the war effort. And then you could ship your dog. He was tested for suitability and then taken to a training camp where he was examined, vaccinated, quarantined, photographed, tattooed, given a set of records, and then their owners received a signed certificate confirming their dog's membership in the program. Interestingly, many people attempted to donate attack dogs. Like they had a mean dog in the backyard and they thought, oh, this dog will be perfect for the military. But actually, those dogs were always turned away because they required very emotionally stable and intelligent dogs that could perform under stress. So they actually wanted your calm pet.
That makes sense. Yeah, and the sled dogs, that's something I learned recently because there were troops that you don't hear about as much, but they were in the colder climates, and they used these sled dogs probably, I think, for those troops at times.
Yeah, they're probably the least known because they were used mostly in the Arctic regions. And a lot of them were trained as paratrooper dogs and would jump out of planes into terrain that was difficult. Maybe a medic couldn't get there, but the sled dogs who were trained to have all of this gear on their backs, they could parachute in and find the downed pilot, and then he could hopefully use what was in this dog's pack and then be sustained and then find his way out.
That's incredible. I think I've seen photographs of some of these paratrooper dogs. That's amazing that they could be trained to do that.
Yeah. And the training was only 13 weeks. 8 weeks for regular training and 13 weeks for specialty training. That's not a lot of time for a pet to
No,
be shipped to them and then totally learn these new skills.
that's incredible. Wow, they must have had a really like very good training program.
Yes,
Um,
they did.
so where were the dogs trained and what did that training involve?
Yeah, there were 5 training camps in the US. There was the San Carlos War Dog Reception and Training Center in California, the Fort Robinson Depot in Nebraska, the Fort Royal Quartermaster Depot in Virginia, one called the Cat Island War Dog Reception Center in Gulfport, Mississippi, and Camp Rimini in Montana. That was where the Montana camp was where the sled dogs were trained because it was the colder climates.
Makes sense.
Hawaii also had its own dog recruiting and training center because logistics of shipping dogs from Hawaii to other training centers was complicated. So they also had their own.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah. The military dog training, like I said, it was 8 weeks, 13 for more specific training, but it was totally based on this master dog relationship. Some of the handlers had experience with dogs, but others didn't. So the training started with just getting to know your dog, grooming, feeding, disease prevention, first aid, how to care for an animal. The basic training, they actually had a military manual that outlined exactly what the training would be. They learned basic obedience, listening to the handler, staying on his left side so that his right hand could hold a weapon. The dogs were trained twice a day, 2 hours each time. They learned to heel, sit, stay, then stay tied up quietly, come on command, crawl, jump, and then everything again, but off leash. Then they were taught to be comfortable wearing muzzles and gas masks, traveling in vehicles, working in loud gunfire. And they also needed to be okay if there was a body laying on the battlefield, not to go over and sniff it or be distracted by any other animals.
Wow, those are some really hardworking dogs.
Yeah.
Trainers. I'm just imagining all of that training that needed to happen so that they could function in a, in a war zone
Yeah.
and do specific tasks. That's incredible.
They're so smart.
Yeah. I was looking in the National Archives and I came across something that said that there was a Department of the Navy, U.S. Marine Corps War Dog Training School in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And
Ah.
so I don't know if you'd had heard of that one. I mean, I haven't been able to dig into it much, but I think there might have been some other places that started off training war dogs at least. I don't know. Have you heard of the Camp Lejeune
I
location?
think that one was for the Marine Corps, or for the dogs that were headed to the Pacifics. So that would have been a branch, maybe, of for Defense. I don't know if there was crossover between Dogs for Defense and the Marine Corps dogs.
Hmm.
There was also the U.S. Coast Guard also used dogs. So I don't know if the U.S. Coast Guard and the Marines were a specific additional training, and maybe not listed under Dogs for Defense.
Ah, interesting. Okay. What types of services did these war dogs perform during World War II? I think we can get a little bit of a hint from that from the training they went through, but what are some of the specific things that they went on to perform during the war?
Yeah, they performed a variety of services. So there were Red Cross casualty dogs that helped the wounded soldiers by providing first aid supplies in their packs, or possibly even leading medics to where a soldier was wounded and unconscious. There was communication dogs who they would travel with a reel of wire on their back or drag wire across front lines to where communication was needed. There
Wow.
was the draft or sled dogs, which we already spoke about, and were often the ones chosen for paratrooping. Uh, there were sentry dogs who were taught to be silent and work about 30 to 40 yards in front of the soldier. And if they sensed enemy in the foreground, then they would point or go back to their handler or signal. And they are credited with saving many lives, especially in the Pacific theater, because the Japanese often didn't surrender, and they would just, fight to the last man. And so it was very important for the dogs to be able to signal where they were. There were mine detection dogs that sniffed out and indicated live mines, and the messenger dogs, which is possibly one of the most remarkable, which they would carry metal cylinders with information like maps or letters between frontline units. And the positions were moving so frequently that the dog had to remember where to go. They were taught not to stop for anything on the way, ignoring animals, people, food. They were crossing large distances to get back to their master and deliver a message. Just, yeah. So those are some of the ways. And then there were the U.S. Coast Guard dogs, and the Marines used their dogs. And there were also just mascot dogs that provided comfort to the men and women.
The messenger dogs, that's incredible to think about. And if we think of what happened to the messenger pigeons in World War One, I wonder if any dogs, lost their lives. I can imagine that some did, in that task. But wow,
they were
incredible.
Sacrificing themselves for their masters.
Yeah. And you mentioned the mascots, and I've seen there's quite a few other types of animals that I've seen as mascots too, like rabbits and cats, and but dogs especially, I think, are the most commonly known ones. How important was the impact on military men and women who interacted with these war dogs?
The mascot dogs, they provided comfort, and they didn't, have a specific task. But I think that in all cases, whether it's just a mascot dog or it's a working dog, the soldiers who worked with those dogs felt a very special bond with them. We still see that today. That's true today. They learned to care for something other than themselves, which helped stave off PTSD. They came to love and trust their dogs with their life. Dogs could perform at a much higher ability at many tasks because of, super senses like hearing and smelling, listening. Yeah. And the men just learned to respect their dogs and trust them, that they could depend on them. A man with a sentry dog felt like he could sleep even in the midst of occupied territory, knowing that his friend would alert him to suspicious activities. So they really relied on their dogs. And the mascot dogs were loved just as dearly. And men and women risked their lives to care for those mascot dogs. And it's just something to snuggle and to remind you of home and humanity and love. And
yeah, that's so important. And I was just looking at a photograph today of two soldiers sleeping, and they've got their dogs with them. And I mean, added warmth, but also, that I think there is something psychological so important, knowing that someone else, like a dog with better hearing, better smelling, smell, is like watching out for you and will help protect you. Like it's an amazing team partnership. So, is there, I mean, there's so many amazing stories out there about war dogs. Is there one particular war dog story that stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll probably talk about this at the end, but I am writing a book about a dog that went to war. So I'll save that for the end because that story, of course, sticks out. But, and I'll shamelessly plug my new book.
Yes, please.
But I'll tell you a different story that's also super cute. So I fell in love with the story of Maggie and Jigs. They were two naughty Siberian Huskies who ended up being the very first dogs in the U.S. Army to receive their paratrooper wings after 5 successful jumps in 1942. And they completed their training in Canada, I might add. So Maggie and Jigs were chosen to make this test jump because they were bad little dogs, these bad Huskies. They always fought with all of the other canines and with each other. And it was felt that if any of the dogs at this training center in BC were expendable, it was this pair. They thought, okay, we'll try with Maggie and Jigs. So they had a 5-pound canvas harness lined with sheepskin on each dog. And then they thought, okay, we're gonna put them on the plane and we're gonna drop them at the same time. And the dogs were led to the plane, snarling and barking and being naughty. And at first they tried to, bite at each other, but when the plane took off, they lay down quietly side by side, and they must have thought, okay, we're in this together. And then at 1,500 feet, they were heaved out, offering no resistance, descended without a yelp, and they landed completely relaxed, ready to hit the trail. And they shaped up to be these pair of pups of the U.S. Army dropped into remote locations to rescue downed pilots. And I just love how they were just this naughty pair of dogs that ended up like being the first dogs to have 5 successful jumps.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I was trying to put myself in the shoes of the soldier that had to shove him out the door of the airplane.
Out you
Like,
go.
we'll see what happens. That's hilarious. Well, I mean, they lived up to an amazing potential,
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they hoped for the dogs.
Yeah, they did. Anybody can be trained.
Yeah. That's so funny. Well, so after the war, there's all these dogs that, many of them were donated from families and they're trained for war work. Did the war dogs ever see their families again?
Well, initially, many of them were euthanized. I was reading an account of the Marine dogs, and they weren't even given a chance to be rehabilitated because they thought there's no solution here. There's no time to work on this. They didn't think that the dog could be detrained and returned home, and because they really were trained to be with their master and do these very specific tasks. So they thought, these dogs aren't going to be able to go back to their homes and just relax. But there was an advocate for them, Captain William Putney. He was a veterinarian with the Marine War Dog Program, and he was one of the loudest voices against this. He said, there's simply no good reason that these dogs can't be rehabilitated. The Army had promised that the dogs would be returned after the war, so Putney was determined to see this promise kept. He said he would not sign a death certificate until extensive detraining had been attempted. So they discussed various methods, and they decided that the detraining program would involve just many handlers coming in and out and spending time with the dogs. So if the handler could pass the dog off to another handler who could pass him off to another handler, and eventually those handlers are in civilian clothes, and during rest periods many people are playing with the dog, they slowly changed hands until the dog allowed anybody to enter his pen, take him out. And then they brought in women. You can see how they did with women, and they treated them for all these parasites and diseases that they had contracted overseas. And most of them were rehabilitated. They handled it just fine. And actually, a lot of the handlers wanted to keep the dogs because the friendship they had developed over the years. You see that today too. Men who've been in Afghanistan or women that want to keep their dog. They've developed this friendship over the years of fighting together. And even in the Second World War, in most cases, the owner allowed the handlers to take the dogs home if they wanted them. That was often the case, but they went home to their original families often too, and there were often more requests for adoption than dogs available. Like a lot of them were returned home. One of my favorite movies is Son of Lassie. I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's like it was filmed just after the war, and it really deals with this question in a beautiful way because Lassie's so with the original story, Lassie come home, a beautiful rough collie. So this Lassie's son, her pup, goes to war and is a war dog, and the pup when the pup comes home, everybody says we got to put this dog down because it's growling, it's biting, it's and clearly this dog can't be retrained, and he has a court case because he's bitten somebody. And they said, are we going to put down everybody who fought in this war? Like, just if you have PTSD doesn't mean that you should be put down. And it's just like a beautiful way to like talk about PTSD in men too, and all the men who are coming home with this PTSD and through the story of this dog. And it's actually a beautiful conversation to be had in 1946 or whenever it was filmed, so close after the war, just trying to engage in that conversation. And I think people took that seriously, that they're heroes too, and they need to come home and have a chance.
Wow. I know you've talked to me about Lassie movies. We both love Lassie, but I haven't seen that one. That is definitely going on my list to watch soon, because that seems like a very poignant, important conversation to happen after the war. And I love that they made a movie to address this so soon after the end of the war. So
yeah, it's a really good one.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing all this information with us, Kelsey. I know you're so passionate about learning about dogs for defense, and you yourself are a dog owner. So it's just something that's near and dear to your heart. And I love talking to you about it. So as you mentioned before, you are the author of two upcoming books. And they're both set in they're both about World War II and set to release in late 2025. So can you tell us about them?
Yeah, I'm excited about both of them. One is more applicable to this podcast episode, but the other is also applicable to your broader podcast.
Yeah.
Because the first one coming out is called Vacation for Victory, and it's about the Canadian Women's Land Army. So I'm very excited about that one, because I think for the longest time, people didn't even know that Canada had a women's land army. We hear about, of course, the British Women's Land Army and the Land Girls. And then the U.S. Women's Land Army has been gaining traction too. And there was one in Australia, but there was also a Women's Land Army in Canada. And so I wrote a thesis on this, and then I turned it into a book, and it's got like 250 pictures in it, and
awesome.
It's very engaging. It tells a lot of stories of the women involved in the program. Yes, we also had labor shortages and a need for food for soldiers and civilians. So we had the exact same problem as you, and we called on women to combat that issue. So that I'm excited about that one, and that's just a nonfiction book coming out for adults. But then I also have a children's book coming out, and that is about war dogs in Canada. So Canada also had war dogs, although we didn't have a Dogs for Defense program. But we did contribute dogs to your Dogs for Defense program in the States, and some dogs in England as well. So when you put out the all call, then Canadian owners also donated their dogs to the States. And then we had some training programs up here for huskies and such. Like I mentioned, Jigs and Maggie were being trained in Canada. But mascots are common in the Canadian Army. We have a lot of mascot dogs. And then I also found the story of a dog named Whitey. And Whitey was a legitimate member of the Canadian Army with his own pay and rank and service number. And he joined the Canadian Army in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He was a little puppy, and he just kept following the soldiers back to their barracks until they said, I guess you can stay, and here's a regimental number.
Wow.
And so he followed them everywhere. He trained with them. He never missed a parade. He even was guarding prisoner of war camps in Ontario. And then they got the news that they were heading overseas, and they thought, well, we can't leave Whitey, but dogs weren't allowed on troop ships. So they smuggled him overseas in an ammunition box.
What?
the rest of the story is in my children's book.
Yes.
So that one's coming out also in the fall. So I'm excited about that one.
I'm excited for both of these books. I've heard a lot about the Women's Land Army research as you were working on your paper and now your book. I am so excited to read them both. So where can listeners find you on social media? Because I know you also on Instagram you post about kind of World War II stuff in general, but also you work at a museum, so and you share things about that. So where can people find you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is 40s.life.with.kelsey. So you can probably find most of my information there, and I'll be posting about when my books come out. I'm sure that they'll be available on Amazon. I'm not exactly sure how the Canada versus US
Oh yeah, true.
Amazon will work, but I think it'll probably be on both Amazon. So, um, but yeah, I will post about when my books are coming out there, and everybody can find out about that.
Awesome. I'll have links to Kelsey's social media account on my Substack post. But thank you again for joining me for this episode, Kelsey. It was really awesome to hear more about Dogs for Defense. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be on the podcast and talk, Second World War. I'm up in Canada, but we're fighting the same war on the same side, and often a lot of things overlap. And
oh yeah,
yeah,
which you can listen about in the Canadian episode I did a couple seasons ago.
This is true.
And Kelsey was a guest for that episode. Anyway, yeah, thanks for joining me.
For today's cookbook feature, well, it was not easy to have a cookbook feature for this episode because I wanted to try a wartime recipe for our cat Caspian. And so there isn't really like a cat cookbook out there. So instead, I found various newspaper articles and I consulted the two wartime era books about cats that I have, All About Cats by Marguerite Saxby Maybe, and then also Cats and All About Them by L.H. Fairchild, MD, and Helen G. Fairchild. And these are actually really helpful resources because while they mostly agree on everything, like I discussed earlier in the podcast, there are some things that they differ on. And then also I wanted to compare to modern recommendations for feeding cats people food. And so I, taking all of that information together, including the newspaper resources that I found, taking all of these resources together, it was good to kind of formulate that base of knowledge. And then I was able to choose an appropriate recipe for our cat based on what he already likes to eat. And the only people food that he really is interested in is cheese. Anytime I'm eating cheese, he is there. He just seems to know. And so occasionally we'll give him a little piece of cheddar cheese. But other than that, he's not really into people food. So, which is great. He doesn't beg for food very much. And so he has his set diet that he seems to do really well with, and he's happy. So this was going to be an interesting experiment to see if he would like it. And I did not do this experiment alone. Kelsey, who was interviewed earlier in this episode, she came back to join me and discussing how her wartime ration recipe for dogs went. And so this is a continuation of that interview.
It's good to be back now that we've fed our pets their recipes. There was one thing I wanted to mention is that after our conversation about where the dogs receive training, I went back and I looked into what you were saying because you had mentioned a couple of other camps. And I realized that, yes, the Fort Robinson in Nebraska and Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, they were also both war dog training camps. and or reception centers. So just a
Oh,
little
interesting.
clarification there. So
Yeah, well,
learning.
that's really cool. I guess I'd never thought about, like, I thought Dogs for Defense was like they trained in one place or maybe a couple places, but then they kind of distributed the dogs to where they needed to go. But they probably needed such specialized training for the different branches of military that, it makes sense like that the Marines would have their own dogs that they were training for what they had to do.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
There's all sorts of topography, and I think there were small camps too. Like I mentioned, those
Yeah.
Huskies were up in Canada and BC, and that's not really recognized as a war dog training camp, but I mean they were being trained there, so there's probably tons that we don't even know about.
Yeah. I think it qualifies. I mean, they had to train for cold weather somewhere.
Yep.
So, well, great. Thanks for sharing that extra tidbit with us.
Yeah.
So how about why don't you share your experience with your tell us which recipe you used and then how Rocky liked it or didn't like it.
Yeah, this is really fun. So I picked the recipe called dog food.
Ooh.
So clever. From the Apron Beacon Journal in 1942. And I picked this one because Rocky's on like a fairly specific like diet. We don't feed him a lot of people food or table
Mhm.
scraps or anything. So he just usually gets his dog food. So some of these that some of the recipes I was reading had some really strange things in them, like cracked wheat and graham flour and all sorts of things. So
Mm.
I went for a very simple recipe. So, and I didn't follow it completely. So I'll explain. So this one was sent in by Mrs. C.F. Willand. So it said boil 1 pound of hamburger in about 2 quarts of water. Add any vegetables that you desire, such as carrots, peas, green beans, etc. And when all this is boiling, add enough cornmeal to thicken. When thoroughly cooked, pour into a dish that can be kept in refrigerator after food is cooled. This will keep for some time. Serve same as other dog food. So I thought, okay, hamburger and some vegetables. That seems safe for Rocky standards. But then I didn't exactly understand about the boiling and thickening. Like that, it just seemed kind of confusing. So, what I ended up doing is I mixed all of those ingredients together in a bowl. So, I took some hamburger that was raw, and then I took frozen carrots and peas, just the little bits. And then I took actually oatmeal instead of cornmeal. And I just kind of like made a paste, and it was almost like a meatball texture.
Hmm.
And then I baked it. So I didn't quite follow the recipe, but I definitely used the same ingredients. And then I let it cool, and Rocky was so excited. Like he could smell it. He was like he's always wondering what we're making in the kitchen. So I pulled it out and I put it on a little plate, and his nose is sniffing, and as I'm putting it towards him, his eyes are like realizing it's for him, and that something from the oven was for him this time, which was really cute. And
Aw.
because he doesn't get anything other than dog food, this was a step up in Rocky's diet, having actual hamburger meat. Like,
Whoa,
and
fancy.
I took a picture of him sniffing it, and then I set it down, and he just gobbled it before I could even take a picture. So the pictures that you have is him like looking at it in anticipation. And but yeah, it's interesting to think that well, there's all sorts of recipes that you sent me with some strange things in them too. But
Mhm.
I think that lots of dogs just used to eat kind of what the people were eating, which is interesting
Mhm.
to me that it didn't used to be so like it
Yeah.
specific to dog diets.
Yeah, I was curious about that cornmeal. I mean the boiling it in the water and then adding the cornmeal, I'm guessing was to cook the cornmeal. But then it's also kind of like a dog version of a meat stretcher recipe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so you're getting that meat flavor all in there with the vegetables and the cornmeal, and then the cornmeal's like really bulking it out so it'll last longer. I don't know if cornmeal is good for dogs. I'm guessing probably not. But I don't know. Is it in dog food these days? I don't know. So, but I mean, that was an economical way of feeding the dog. And does Rocky eat like dog kibble or wet dog food? What does he normally eat?
Dry kibble.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. Well, I'm so glad Rocky got such a nice treat.
Yeah, he was excited. It was cute.
Great. Okay. Well, that sounds like it was a successful recipe. So I tried 2 different things with Caspian, our cat. And the first one was a failure because so I was just kind of reading through the different the recommendations in these like cat books that I have. And so I kind of gathered 4 different ingredients and served them to him separately. So like I cooked some chicken liver, had that separate, and I rinsed off some cottage cheese because I don't think I can get farmer style cottage cheese is what they recommend. So I just rinsed off some cottage cheese so it wasn't like all that heavy cream. And I scrambled some eggs and cooked that for him. And then what was the other thing? Fish. Oh, yes. So I cooked some fish for him. And he likes fish a lot. And he has been known to lick like some like scrambled egg raw from the counter. If I don't get to it fast enough, I drip it on there. So anyway, so I'm like, I think he'll like these. He likes cheese. You know, he likes chicken in his own wet cat food. So I'm like, okay, this should be, he'll eat one of these. No, he just sniffed them all and then walked away. I'm like, great.
Oh,
Rude.
that's so funny.
Yeah. So, okay, I was thinking maybe I need to make it more familiar since we don't feed him people food. So he was just like curious and I was like, okay. So I tried a new recipe and this came from, well, the others, I can't call that a recipe, but so this is from the Evening Star from Washington, D.C. From 1943. And somebody sent in like their own recipe. Somebody had written asking for a cat food recipe, and so they were responding. In answer to a request for help in feeding cats, here is my special cat food recipe. And so they use 1 pound of beef or pork liver, cook until done in boiling water, then grind. And then 1 cup mashed cooked green beans, 1 cup mashed cooked carrots. Third, the newspaper is kind of messed up on this part. I think it's a 1/3 cup of barley. Measure before cooking. So you're supposed to cook the barley. 1.5 cups of small biscuits, soak and mash. And so small biscuits, I think, is referring to like dog biscuits or like, it's not like the bone treat biscuits that we have. I mean, that's what I think of when I think of dog biscuits. It's actually food, like dog food. And then combine all the ingredients and add enough of the liver liquid. That sounds so gross. To make the desired consistency. They say that you can also use a can of salmon or mackerel in place of the liver. And her cats just seem to like the mackerel cat food instead of the liver. This recipe has been used by many of our friends for their cats and with as much success. Okay, so I was like, well, if their cats liked it, maybe my cat will like it. So I also made some modifications since my liver by that point it wasn't good anymore because this was quite a few days later. So instead, I thought out some ground beef for our dinner, so I just used ground beef for his, and I cooked it. Then I also picked out some peas and carrots and just a few green beans, like frozen mix, like you did. Mm-hmm. And then I cooked those for quite a while, the vegetables separately, because I didn't want them. I just wanted them to puree really well for him. Then I softened some oats in some water, so just let that soak for a while. And then I took some of his own crunchy cat food because he really likes his crunchies. And I soaked that in water so it was softened. And then I pureed it. It looked, like a pate, like he's used to eating that that pate style of wet cat food. And I stuck it down there, and oh my gosh, he ate it all. Not at once. Like, he tends to like eat a little bit and come back later. So that's what he did, and he ate it all. He really loved it. So as an experiment, because I didn't want to give him too many oats. I don't think oats are probably that great for cats. So
Yeah.
or even the green beans. I don't know. I know
I'm
some cats like
wondering
vegetables.
about all of these. I mean,
I don't know. So the next day I gave it to him again, and he only ate like half of it. I'm like, okay, he's over it now. So, but if he's starving, that would be in wartime. This would be probably a great alternative. Yeah. So I'd say the second recipe was a success.
nice.
I think it's funny the recipes that say salt to taste. Like, how are we supposed to figure that out?
Tasting this.
Yeah. I'm sure animals do need the salt, but like, I'm not going to taste their food to see if it's enough. Well, that's great. I feel like this was an overall ration recipe success. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. Yeah. And it's truly in the spirit of rationing. I think using what you have and kind of making it yours. I'm sure that's what people were doing. They read these recipes and they think, oh, I have a little bit of this or that in my fridge and make it work. I think we were just doing it right in the same spirit as them.
Yeah, I agree. And it is kind of empowering to think that, oh, I can make my own pet food. And of course, you do have to understand like about the nutrition aspects of what like a cat needs or a dog needs. And so that's why I've said earlier in the episode to like consult with your veterinarian if you're going to change your pet's diet, to like try out these ration recipes on a long-term basis. Well, cool. Thanks for joining me on this very fun adventure.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is one of my favorite topics, as you know.
Yes. I'm so glad you're able to join me again. For today's story highlight, we are going to be looking at 3 different stories that I found in the newspaper, and they mostly involve dogs. 2 dogs and 1 cat story. The first one is from the News and Advance from Virginia, December 28th, 1942. It says, when Ed Weidman of Kansas City joined the Army, his 4-year-old Spitz dog Texas became rather despondent. The dog ate very little and became ill. When letters from his master began to arrive home, the dog would yelp excitedly whenever one arrived. Weidman's family claim the dog recognizes these letters by their scent, and that these have cheered the dog up, for now his appetite and health have both returned. The dog now has developed the habit of dashing out to meet the mailman each day. If the dog starts to bark excitedly, the family knows a letter from Ed is arriving. Aw, that is such a sweet story. They even have a little illustration of a dog eating out of a dog dish above the story. So that is really sweet. And I think that's amazing that the dog can recognize a scent of a letter that's probably traveled hundreds, if not thousands of miles and touched multiple hands. So dogs are incredible. The next story comes from the Nome Nugget of Alaska from May 10th, 1944. And it's out of Fort Richardson. Like many other Army posts in Alaska, Fort Richardson has literally gone to the dogs, and the authorities have decided to do something about it. The post is overrun with canines of all sizes and shapes, from small domestic types to large beasts with a definite strain of wolf blood. Many organizations can now boast a full squad of dogs. The birth rate is high, and the situation is becoming more serious with every litter of pups. Oh dear. Soldiers here can still have their pets, but are now required to register them, have them inoculated for rabies, and obtain dog tags for them. Private Van Kuroga of Pensacola, Florida, has been appointed dog catcher to enforce the measure. Oh, wow. A dog pound with individual dog houses and runaways has been built in, of all places, a nearby prisoner of war internment camp, which is not in use. One of the first 5 tagless dogs to land in the Bastille was a brown Springer Spaniel, property of Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., Alaskan Department Commander, who is himself a dog lover. It was quickly claimed by the general. Quiroga is making regular patrols through the post, and canines that can't prove by their dog tags that they have been registered and vaccinated are thrown in the clink. A description of the quote-unquote inmates is published for 3 days in the Post's daily bulletin so that owners may claim them. Captain F.L. Meyer, veterinarian, estimates there are at least 200 dogs on the post. Wow. Approximately half of them have already been vaccinated. It is hoped some of the unclaimed dogs can be placed with responsible owners. Captain Meyer said his office received frequent requests for pet dogs, the only hitch being that they usually desire a specific type, and some of the vagrant canines have few redeeming features. The dog pound will also be available for boarding out pets, while their soldier masters are on leaves or furloughs. The charge for this service will be 50 cents a day to cover food and other expenses. Most of the post dogs are faithful to only one organization and come to be identified with that unit. Certain celebrities among the canine colony are known by name to nearly every soldier on this large post. One good example of this is Jeff, a husky sled dog long since retired who is a regular blood donor at the veterinarian's clinic when a sick or injured dog is in need of a transfusion. Big and healthy, Jeff doesn't seem to mind it much, and he is usually rewarded with a good dinner. Wow. What a fun story. I just never thought. I mean, I know that there were military pets. Soldiers would adopt various animals, and some of them would be their mascots. But I had no idea that the military posts would have so many dogs. And I love the story of at the end of Jeff. I don't work in the veterinary field, obviously. I never thought about where the blood comes from for other dogs or cats. They have to come from another dog or cat. And so I think that's awesome that Jeff served as this blood donor for injured or sick dogs. So anyway, wow. That must have been a wild time at Fort Richardson. And finally, the cat story. This is a doozy, guys. All right. This is from the Lansing State Journal in Michigan, March 30th, 1943. And it comes out of Kansas City. The lion hunt in the boarding house basement got off to a futile start yesterday. So today they'll slip knockout drops in the brute supper. That's right. It's about a lion. Efforts to entice Speck, a 600-pound lion from his basement den, just didn't work. He gulped bait that was intended to lead him into a cage, then leaped back before the iron door could clang shut. He's lived in the downtown boarding house basement since the landlady, Mrs. Mary Pratt, bought him as a cub 5 years ago for $50. He hasn't seen daylight in all that time, Mrs. Pratt added. He grew swiftly, and outdoor exercise didn't seem quite the thing. Meat rationing, plus the fact Speck eats 18 to 22 pounds a day, persuaded Mrs. Pratt to give Speck to Clyde Beatty, wild animal trainer. Beatty sent a man to get the brute. Police and zoo director William T.A. Culley came along, but none of their wiles succeeded. Speck stayed in his den, growling in his beard. We'll put some anesthetic in his food, Culley concluded at last. When it takes effect, he'll sleep for at least a week. By that time, he'll be with an animal troop. Oh, wow. I feel very sorry for Speck. The fact that he lived his entire life in a basement of a downtown boarding house. That's really sad. And I feel like Mrs. Pratt didn't quite maybe understand what she was getting herself into. But, it wasn't until meat rationing became a thing that she had to think maybe this isn't such a good idea. Oh my goodness. Wow. Anyway, those are the stories for the Homefront highlight. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And I learned quite a lot researching and it was very enjoyable. And I know so many people love animals, and so this episode is dedicated to you, animal lovers. So anyway, thanks again for listening. You can join me on Substack, victorykitchenpodcast.substack.com, where I post all kinds of things, articles, pictures, and recipes, and of course these episode posts with all my research. And I would love it if you could join me there. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.